Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom.
Good morning, and welcome to this third episode of the radio program Discovering Sacred Christian Art. I hope that you enjoyed the past episodes, and today I will speak about the Vatican necropolis and the tomb of St. Peter. Today, I would like, before starting, to remember the figure of Pope Paul VI, since yesterday we remember his birthday. Pope Paul VI, that was the pontiff of the final step of the discovery of the tomb of St. Peter, a discovery that ended in 1968, exactly 50 years ago. But a short introduction dedicated to the figure of Pope Paul VI. He was born with the names of Giovanni Battista Enrico Montini in Concesio in Brescia area, here in Lombardy region, North Italy, on 26th of September. He was born in 1897. And he died, as we remembered also during this summer, on the 6th of August in 1978. He was the Pope of Vatican City-State from June 21 in 1963, after the death of Saint John the 23rd, and he was venerable since the month of December of 2012, after Pope Benedict XVI recognized his heroic virtues. And he was beatified on October the 19th in 2014 by Pope Francis. And he will be canonized on October the 14th in the next 2 weeks. Personally, I don't know if I will be in Rome or in Concesio, that is his hometown, following the celebrations, but of course, I will update you, my dear listeners. And before starting our talk dedicated to the Vatican necropolis, an important news from Turin in North Italy. Today and tomorrow, for the first time after 21 years, the Chapel of the Holy Shroud is open to the public. The Chapel of the Holy Shroud, I can say in Italian, the Chapel of the Sacra Sindone, is a Baroque-style Roman Catholic chapel in Turin, located outside the Turin Cathedral and connected to the Royal Palace of Turin. This chapel was designed by the architect Guarino Guarini and built at the end of the 17th century. It was built from the 1668 until the 1694, during the reign of Charles Emmanuel II, Duke of Savoy. The chapel was constructed to house the Shroud of Turin, that is our religious relic, believed by many to be the burial shroud of Jesus Christ. And now let me introduce the topic of today with a connection with the theme of the past episode of our radio program, Discovering Sacred Christian Art. The question that we met during our analysis of the history of the catacombs, the question of the imago. What is imago? It's a Latin word that means, I can translate in Italian, immagine, and in English, image. Imago was the Latin term to indicate the ancient icons that in Christian antiquity, thanks to their almost sacramental power, ensured the arduous and mysterious journey of the human gaze towards intangible, transcendent universes. The icons of our time, of course, have maintained the same imaginative power, as well as the same force of attraction, but it is not towards any other word that they intend to bring. It's a different use of the term. And I can say that since the beginning, as the catacombal paintings amply can testify, Christian art appears dependent on the pagan repertoire and strongly rooted in an iconographic and stylistic fabric of classical substance, of Greek and of Roman substance. If the codification of early Christian art is mainly based on the biblical imaginary, it found a stable and fertile ground even in the cultural world of the time, that is, in the Greco-Roman culture that enjoyed a certain prestige among many thinkers, that was Christians. This element gradually led to the assumption of classical cultural and artistic values and to the assimilation of contemporary iconography, contemporary for that time, of course, the first 4 centuries, whereby the pagan imagery found a lively continuity in the late Jewish and in Christian culture, extending then until the Middle Ages. In particular, as stated by the great art historian Andrei Grabar, the Christian figurative language derives in large part from the official vocabulary of the Roman state in the sense of the Roman Empire, the Roman culture, and its conventional schemes. This is evident, above all, in the representation of persons for which is used a single gestural repertoire. And now, let's go on, and let's now go on Vatican Hill. Imagine to be guided by me in our trip around Rome. We visited the catacombs, and today we will visit the Vatican necropolis. You know that the name Vatican comes from the ancient Roman term vates, that was the hill used by priests of the Roman pagan culture, the vates. So the name Vatican. Now, my first step, under the Basilica of St. Peter, Vatican. Now, if you are in front of your computer, you can go to the web page of WCAT Radio, section Discovering Sacred Christian Art, and there, you will find free images that, under the suggestion of Dr. Sebastian Mahfoud, I chose for you, so you can follow my discourse. But if you want, if you are in front of your PC or smartphone, you can search also for Vatican Hill, just to have a clear image of the location of the Vatican in Rome. If you want to visit the Vatican necropolis and the tomb of St. Peter, you must first refer to book your visit to what we indicate today with the correct name of Ufficio Scavi, the escapes office of the Fabbrica di San Pietro. Some indications for the visits to the tomb of St. Peter and the necropolis under the Vatican Basilica you will find in the website of this office. Special visits to the necropolis underneath the Basilica, where the tomb of St. Peter is located, are only possible following special permission granted from time to time by the Fabbrica di San Pietro. Visits are organized according to the schedule set by the excavations office. In order to preserve this exceptional historical archaeological site, and due to the limited premises around the venerated tomb of the Apostle Peter, only around 250 visitors per day are permitted to enter. Groups are composed of approximately 12 people and according to language, and only those who are 15 years old or older will be admitted. No exceptions will be made. The guided visits last about an hour and a half. And now let's start this virtual guide with me, Dr. Michela Ferri, in the Vatican Hill. Let's go back to the origin. The Vatican Hill was the place of the Circus of Nero, the emperor. The Vatican necropolis, located exactly 10 meters deep in the Basilica of St. Peter in the Vatican, below the current level of the Vatican grottos, in the correspondence of the central nave of the same St. Peter Basilica, belongs to a funeral area of the Roman age, formed over time next to the disappeared circus of the Emperor Nero, where pagan and Christian tombs coexist, date back to the period between the 1st century and 3rd century. And we know that our terminus is the 313 Edict of Milan by the Emperor Constantine. Well, the Circus of Nero was a facility for performances of ancient Romans. It was 500 meters long and about 100 meters wide, and stood in the place where today is located the Basilica of St. Peter in Vatican. In this valley that ran from where the left side of the Basilica is until almost reaching the Tiber, the river. The area of the so-called carceres, from the word carceres derives the word prison, from where the Bigies departed, was located at the point from which the so-called Way of the Sant'Uffizio leaves Piazza Pius XII, while that of the curved side is traced a few tenths of meters after the apse of the Basilica of St. Peter. In this private circus, because it was a private circus of the Emperor Nero, were held horse races, chariots, and quadriga, very popular in Rome at that time, so that on some occasions the Emperor Nero, who normally attended only with his court these spectacles, he opened the doors of the circus to the people of Rome. It is likely that the plant should not contain more than 20,000 spectators. Try to imagine. Here took place perhaps due to the proximity to an adjacent necropolis, some executions of the Christians convicted of having caused the Great Fire of Rome, because you know that this was the denounce of Nero, the emperor. The circus of Nero was abandoned already in the middle of the 2nd century. Anno Domini, of course, we are talking about from the 33 year of the death of Jesus and going on. And the area of the circus was subdivided and so assigned to private individuals for the construction of tombs belonging to the necropolis. However, it seems that until the Middle Ages, 15th century, many remains of Nero's circus survived, destroyed by the construction of the new Vatican Basilica of St. Peter. And if you will visit the place, the obelisk, which was placed at the center of the circus sword, had been transported here from the city of Heliopolis, where it was located in the Iuli Forum of Heliopolis. Here remained until Pope Sixtus V in the 16th century moved it to the center of St. Peter's Square. And so we see it today again. Second step of our journey, the Vatican Hill, the martyrdom of St. Peter. Well, it is important to underline that in the imperial age, as I recalled some minutes ago, the Ager Vaticanus, that is, the Vatican area, was a large area on the right bank of the Tiber, the river Tevere, the Tiber, much sought after by noble families who choose it for their residences or for walks among the so-called horti, in Latin horti, in plural, hortus in singular, is a garden with fountains, with small temples, and with decorations. Among these, there is the most famous, that were the horti of the noble woman Agrippina Major, who after his death were inherited by his son, the Emperor Caligula. So, we talk about the circus of Nero, but we also know it under the name of Hippodrome of Caligula. It's the same thing. I prefer personally, for scientific reason, to refer to it as the Circus of Nero. Step number 3, the Vatican sepulchres. In this same area, where today stands the Basilica of St. Peter, there was a very large funeral area, which was not included within the city walls as required by law, as I explained in the episode number 2, and as I recalled also in the episode number 1. It was a great funeral area, largely used by freed slaves who had made their fortune and had bought the tomb here for them and for their families. After the famous fire in Rome that happened in 64, the Emperor Nero transformed the place into a gruesome stage for the execution, terrible execution of many Christians, our first martyrs, who he accused of being responsible for the city's fire. It was at this stage that the circus of Nero, lost its original function and gradually began to host burials. So try to imagine now the center of Christianity. The Basilica of St. Peter was the Circus of Nero, where the first Christian martyrs died. Another step, St. Peter in Rome. Here, in this area, found death by crucifixion, as we know, most likely in the neighbor's so-called Horti Nero, the gardens of Nero, the most illustrious famous of the Christians of that time, our Apostle Peter. According to an ancient tradition, the Apostle Peter was buried between 64 and 67 in a humble pit and in the bare ground on the southern slopes of the Vatican Hill, right in front of the Circus of Nero, which was the theater of the first persecutions from 54 to 68 after Christ. 100 years after the martyrdom of the Apostle Peter, so around, we can say, the year 162, a small funeral edicule was built, very simple, with 2 columns supporting a slab of marble and another slab at ground level, like a manhole, remembered by the presbyter Gaio, called the Gaius Trophy. Please remember this name, the Gaius Trophy, now the place of the tomb of Peter. It was the central point of the necropolis, of what today is the Vatican necropolis, around which were placed all the subsequent burials, which indicated for a long time, the first Christians said, the tomb of Peter, place of devoted pilgrimages, starting from the 2nd century, even before the construction of the basilica, because you know, and we will discover in the next episode, that the first basilica was built by the Emperor Constantine. Another step, what is under the famous basilica dedicated to St. Peter? First point, the landfill. Please follow me by looking at the image number 3 on the web page of WCAT Radio, Discovering Sacred Christian Art. The image 3 indicates the reconstruction of the mausoleums before the St. Peter's Basilica, commissioned by the Emperor Constantine. Well, the Vatican necropolis was found underground when our Emperor Constantine, for building the primitive basilica dedicated to St. Peter, ordered to smooth the Vatican Hill. To smooth the Vatican Hill in order to have a plateau suitable for building. So, he ordered to demolish the vaults that excited the planned height, buried with the funeral material taken from the hill, the funerary chambers, and leveling the small valley, reduced to a plateau that also nowadays, among the archaeologists, is called Petri, the Platea Sancti Petri, the plateau of St. Peter, where the foundations of the building were laid. The burial of cemetery area, presumably still in use in the 4th century, as I indicated before, from the 1st century until the beginning of the 4th century, unusual also from a religious and from a juridical point of view, and carried out at a great expense is justified only by the great importance attributed to the burial of the apostle recognized as authentic, the apostle St. Peter. Next step, the excavations. And now you can watch at the image 1 and at the image, the website of WCAT Radio, Discovering Sacred Art, the plan of the necropolis at today's Basilica of St. Peter. Well, the excavations of the necropolis that now we call the Vatican necropolis were carried out during the pontificate of Pope Pius XII. He was Pope starting from the 1939 until the 1958. So the works started in the years between 1939 and ended in 1949. These works of excavations were undertaken following a strange request, the request of the predecessor, Pope Pius XI, because Pope Pius XI had left written in his will to be buried in a place of the Vatican grottos, as close as possible to the tomb of St. Peter. But the place chosen by Pope Pius XI was cramped, and it was decided to lower the floor to make the work easier. Shortly thereafter, traces of a 2nd century edicula appeared, and the scholars, the sourcing and findings in the end, immediately recognized this as the tomb of St. Peter. But not only that, further excavations led to the discovery of what was initially interpreted as the remains of a sarcophagus, but which, on closer examination, turned out to be the cornice of the Roman building. When the excavations began in these very complicated years, because the Second World War were taking place, a double row of burial buildings appeared on the slope of the Vatican Hill that was tremendously surprising. They were placed next to each other from the west to the east, built with brick walls and interiors full of stucco, paintings, and mosaics. The excavations then brought to light a necropolis whose main nucleus dates back to the 2nd century and which is used for a long period between the 1st century and, as I recalled before, the beginning of the 4th century. The depth of the necropolis, the Vatican necropolis, is from the 12 meters until the 5 meters compared to the floor level of this nowadays basilica, our Basilica of St. Peter. The excavations have not brought to light the whole necropolis. Pay attention if you will visit it. Parts of the necropolis is still underground and is still unexplored. The mausoleums, and you can see the scheme in front of you, found belonged to the families of wealthy freedmen and consisted of large rooms covered with vaulted, often with a fence in front, and equipped with a terrace which was accessed via an external staircase. The dead who were buried here could be both cremated but also buried. The interior of the sepulchral rooms was entirely decorated with paintings, stucco, and sometimes even with mosaics. The excavations were conducted on a total area of 69 meters per 18 meters, we can say. The cemetery that was brought to light was open-air cemetery before the arrival of the Constantine project. And during the excavations, they discovered that a narrow road climbed the Vatican Hill, and on its sides are the buildings with elegant brick facades. All the buildings, these buildings that now we see only under the ground, only as a Vatican necropolis, were facing the Circus of Nero, which was, as we know, surely or probably, the site of the martyrdom of the Apostle Peter, but now we are quite sure it was. Another step, the tomb of St. Peter. The so-called tomb of Peter is currently located in the Vatican grottos, and exactly in correspondence of the altar of the Basilica of St. Peter. No church except the Roman Church has ever boasted the presence of the saint's burial. Regarding the location of the tomb of St. Peter, the tradition according to which it has suffered 1 or 2 or 3 displacements in the first 2 centuries before returning to the original position has now been critically dismantled. The interpretation of the data of the tradition is not easy and depends both on the hypothesis that there has been a single or a double or another translation of the relics, both from the question related to the period in which the many or the single translation would occur. But let's focus on the place of the original burial of St. Peter. Now, we can say that we need to thank the figure of the most famous Italian archaeologist, Margherita Guarducci. She was born in 1992 and she died in 1999. She advocated the thesis of the uninterrupted permanence of the body remains of Peter in the necropolis at the foot of the Vatican Hill from the dead until the discovery during the excavations ordered by Pope Pius XII on remembrance of by observing the willing of Pope Pius XI. And this was a widespread belief that these remains had undergone at least one translation. The tomb of Peter was identified at the so-called P Campus, Campo P, P as Peter, in the west of the necropolis, where the piety of the Christians in the 2nd century had built for the Apostle Peter a small shrine already around the middle of the 2nd century. Apart from the tomb of Peter, the most significant, largest, and most luxurious element of the necropolis is the mausoleum of the Valeri, the family of the Valeri. It is a Roman tomb, famous, decorated with excellent stuccos, bright colors, and frescoes that imitated polychrome marble. Built shortly after the middle of the 2nd century, it is located in the center of the Vatican necropolis. And we can say that the excavations to the discovery of the tomb of Peter were conducted with hasty methods. Unfortunately, the excavators broke through a series of altars, one on top of the other, one on the top of the other one, built during the centuries by the popes with significant continuity over the centuries. For example, under the altar of Pope Clement VIII, still visible today, a second one was found of Pope Callistus II, and under this was found that Pope Gregory the Great wanted his altar, and which in turn rested on the Constantinian Basilica. The excavation of the level below the level of the basilica led the archaeologists to discover a Roman necropolis, the Roman necropolis in which the bones of St. Peter were conserved. And we can say that according to the reconstruction of the archaeologists, St. Peter had been buried in the bare earth inside a Roman cemetery with masonry tombs. His tomb later was surrounded by other burials, always in the bare earth, of other Christians. And we can say that after Constantine had liberalized all the religious cults, all from the 313 edicts of Milan, the bones of St. Peter, maybe they were translated into a sumptuous covering of 3 walls in a purple marble, alternating with the porphyr lists. The presence of fragments of red, and if you see the image, it's colored in red, inside shows the translation of the sacred remains from the original place. The Christian basilica was built above these niches. The place where the niche was found today corresponds to the famous altar of confession of the Basilica of St. Peter. And now, let us deepen this analysis. I just want to say that due to the breakthrough of Constantine's coating, which was unfortunately one of the numerous errors in which the excavators stumbled, Peter's bone, which had remained unaltered in the niche ossuary for nearly 19 centuries, ended up mixed with debris. It happened in the 30s when Pope Pius XII ordered the excavations. Luckily, the head of the excavators, the excavation workers, aware of the presence of human bones among the debris, put them in a box. And it was thanks to Professor Margherita Guarducci if that box was not lost. During the research on what was left after the excavations, she managed to track down the leader of the workers and to take delivery of the human remains in the box. So it happened that, unfortunately, Margherita Guarducci's proposal related to the fact that they discovered some important graffiti, included one important written in ancient Greek, which was rebuilt as and translated as Petros in ancient Greek. Peter is here. This writing was on the wall of the tomb excavated. Guarducci's proposal met numerous detractors who did not believe in the authenticity of the discovery, but the dispute, very heated, continued until 1968. And on June the 26th, 3 days before the feast of St. Peter and St. Paul the Apostles, 26th of June 1968, exactly 50 years ago, Pope Paul VI officially stated that the relics of the apostle had been found. The next day, the remains were relocated in the original loculus, enclosed in a box of plexiglass, together with a closed cartouche. And in the identification of the bones, the Pope wrote, "Bones that are believed to belong to St. Peter." Let me conclude with an imaginary representation. If the center of the Basilica of St. Peter would hang a plumb line, this would fall exactly on that modest plexiglass box containing St. Peter's bones, confirming a tradition of 2,000 years of art and faith. The meaning of the confession of Peter would then be better understood, that niche from which the Byzantine icon of Christ shines in the mosaic, visible also from the balustrade of St. Peter, which burns its 99 votive lamps. Under the icon, the precious box does not contain the bones of Peter, but the pallios stalls with crosses that the Pope gives to the newly elected metropolitan bishops to mark their link with Peter. The restoration happened in 1998, 30 years later, and we can say that there is a list of popes buried in the Vatican necropolis. Excluding the tomb of Peter, the necropolis is still home of 11 popes, including probable 7, among which Saint Sistus I, Saint Victor I, Saint Lino, Saint Clito, Saint Pius I. Well, I hope, my dear listeners, that you enjoyed this third episode that in which we had the occasion to talk about the tomb of St. Peter. In the next talk that I will deliver on 4th of October, day dedicated to St. Francis, I will speak about sacred Christian art in Constantinian era and First Vatican Basilica that was built under the Emperor Constantine. And I wish you a good day, and I hope that you will be here for listening the next 4th episode. Have a nice day. May God bless you. Bye-bye.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.